Hello everyone. Today we begin our session number 9 of the UPSC CSE the ethics paper. Okay, it is only after covering 8 sessions that I feel we have earned the right to start learning about one of the greatest philosophers of all time, Socrates. Okay, while this session is going to be majorly about Socrates, as I begin, I wanted to talk to you about writing good answers, writing high quality answers in your CSE mains, the ethics paper. Okay? The learnings of today's session, whether it is Socrates, and as we move forward, around 22 to 25 philosophers in our list, the Western ones, apart from the Indian philosophers. Okay? That will be useful to you in 3 different areas. One is for the purpose of this paper. Okay? The second is wherever you come across an essay with a philosophical aspect to it or a philosophical dimension which is in your essay papers. And the third is the day when you are actually facing interviews with the board. All right. Now UPSC intended this paper to be a paper of deep reflection for you, is reflecting on yourself, what you stand for, who you are. Basically, I can say development of your character. So it is not only for use of this, but an overall development of your character, and number 2, your way of thinking. So when these two things come together, the character, the way of thinking, it becomes a way of life, taking decisions, the right decisions. And how do you figure out it's a right decision to take? All right. I wanted to use, for the purpose of teaching you about Socrates, mind maps, as I typically do in all my videos. Something visual for you, something visually striking, so that it easily can be retained in our memory rather than pages and pages of text. As they say, a picture is worth 1,000 words. All right, and we also use mnemonics. What are mnemonics? Tricks, tips, could be a short story, could be an image, could be a poem that you might frame for the purpose of retaining some information. But I assure you, like what the great philosopher Plato had said, you will need the crutches. Crutches is like somebody who has hurt his leg, his or her leg, uses those crutches to walk. These kind of memory aids, memory tools like mind maps, mnemonics, you will need to use them as crutches only till the time you have not grasped the truth, the knowledge, or what Plato calls is form of the good. Anyway, let us not bother about Plato's teachings at this point of time. We'll like to rather focus on Socrates. Okay, just as we begin, let's talk about writing answers. I'll give you detailed examples later. Right now, try and understand it conceptually. Okay, let's say you're writing an answer which is about 250 words. So, let's say this is the text you have written. and you completed 250 words, 300 words, or maybe for philosophical essays, the limit which is prescribed. Now, what you've done is you've written a lot of English. That means you've expressed a whole lot of what I say as professor of ethics is mere English. All right? I'll tell you why I'm saying this. Then what you do is you've written some examples, maybe an example 1, and then there is an example 2. I assure you, as a professor of ethics, these kind of answers are very low grade answers. You know why? Because number 1, the question never asked you to offer any examples. It did not ask you to illustrate your answer with examples. Until a question is specifically asking you to illustrate your answer with examples, please do not quote examples. You cannot substitute for knowledge. You cannot substitute the truth, the wisdom, the logic in your answer by hiding behind examples or analogies. Okay? If you remember, when I was talking to you about meta-ethics in session number 1, there was a particular hat I had drawn. And I said, this is one of the hats which belongs to linguistics. Under linguistics, I mentioned semantics and pragmatism. I don't want to repeat this. I just want to draw a conclusion from this. Semantics, under semantics, I used 2 specific words. One is semantics, or what is semantics? Meaning of different elements of a language. So whatever you've written, what is the meaning that is emerging out? Are you trying to do 2 things? And think about it. One is obfuscate your answer like this. And what does it mean? And second is obscure. Obscure would mean turning dark, turning dim, or turning dark. That means you're trying to hide behind mere English and examples. Thereby you are trying to turn the logic and everything as a little dark or dim so that the examiner does not find out, okay? Does not find out that you do not know the logic. That is obscure. Second, what you want to be doing is obfuscate. Obfuscate means you are unnecessarily trying to use complex language in order to get by, so that the examiner again does not figure out that you do not know the right answer. Believe me, none of these techniques are going to work. Okay? So anybody who wants a reference to this, session number 1. Okay. The person who's going to evaluate your answers knows these tricks. Okay? That's a very low grade answer. Supposing there was some reference to Socrates here. I'm giving you an example to Socrates. Okay? So for every question there is an ideal answer which is prepared, which is like a key, which everybody utilizes when they are examining your answer sheets and awarding you marks. Supposing this required a concept called Let's say, speaking of Socrates, supposing eudaimonia, I'll explain in this session what it is. Supposing this term was needed here, you've not mentioned this term. Let's say there was another term which is called elanchus, which was needed, you haven't mentioned it. Maybe there was a term called aporia, you've not mentioned it. You've not mentioned a term called sophistry. In your answer, but you tried to obscure and or obfuscate your answer by playing it clever. Alright? If an answer requires these four elements, these four terms, if the answer requires a phrase by Socrates called, an unexamined life is not worth living. Okay? Or you had to mention Socratic intellectualism and you have not mentioned it. If you do that, that's a very low grade answer. It'll get you probably 2 out of 10. You can mention all the examples you want in this world. If you mention the terms that are needed, it instantly communicates to the person who is evaluating your answer sheet that you know what the subject matter is. You've gone to the core of that question, you've understood it, and now you're responding to it. That is what makes a very high grade answer. Okay? So let's get started. This was a short hint. I'll have a separate session. In fact, I'll have 3 different sessions which are dedicated to writing good answers and specifically for ethics and philosophical essays. Alright. So let's use mind maps to speak about Socrates, and the reason why I wrote revision is if you deploy the right mind map, even as you're walking, in 5 minutes flat, you'll be able to cover everything about Socrates in the right manner, okay, in an accurate manner. But before that, we need to build up a deep understanding of what Socrates stood for. All right, let's start with it. So I'm going to play with the name itself, okay. So let's start with a big S. All right. I'm going to make something called features of the face. A happy face. Okay. Anything and everything that I draw and write is with a purpose. It's not random. I'll explain it in 2 minutes. Can you remember these terms U, V, and W? UV stands for unity of virtues. Alright? Like nowadays we say personality characteristics and characteristics that are useful and characteristics that are not useful, especially when we are studying personality, the ocean and we use ocean to figure out personality traits. Here we are talking of virtues, quality of someone's character. All right. According to Socrates, there were 5 virtues. Okay, and all these 5 virtues, there is unity of virtues. So they're not separate. So 5 virtues, they're not separate, they are unified. So the right term that you should write down is unity of virtues. The second word you should use here is, instead of unity, slash interconnectedness of virtues. And third is inseparableness of virtues. It all means one and the same thing. Okay, unity, interconnectedness, inseparableness of virtues. What exactly it means, I'll let you know. Okay, when we speak of virtues that Socrates talked about, there are 5: justice, courage, something called temperance, wisdom, and piety. Piety, piety. Temperance, temperance. Okay, I'll explain exactly what all it means. All right. Temperance, for example, means it has two components. One is self-control and second is restraint. Okay, I'll just put it down for you. Temperance is self-control and the second is restraint. Self-control, while we'll talk in greater depth, self-control as in self-discipline in your ordinary routine matters. Ordinary routine matters as you lead your life every day. The kind of self-discipline or self-control that you use. Okay? Restraint is like what? We could restrain somebody with handcuffs, either like this or like this. Restraint. Restraint is wherever you come across an urge, a burning urge, or you can say, we could use a term like impulsive behavior. Suddenly you're struck by impulse and you just cannot have any kind of restraint on you. Those kind of situations is where restraint comes into play. Okay, self-control and restraint. I'll keep rubbing this off because I'll need a lot more board space. So keep noting it down. So we've already learned virtues. Now what did he mean by unity of virtues? Or interconnectedness of virtues or inseparableness of virtues? What he meant is all these 5 virtues are not separate from each other. You cannot separate them into different compartments. They're all interconnected. They're unified because you cannot do justice until you are wise. You cannot have temperance, self-control and restraint until you are wise. You cannot be wise until you can display courage. Courage to face some tough questions. Courage to pose some tough questions onto yourself. Courage to accept answers. Okay? Courage to accept, adopt new ways, different ways, rather than getting threatened by it, rather than being very suspicious, skeptical, hostile to new ways or different ways of doing things, of a different culture. Anything that is new and different, a new practice, a new tradition, a new custom, a new ritual, etc. New things. Even that takes a lot of courage. So your process of self-discovery also takes a lot of courage. And apart from the courage that is used in war at that point of time, in war. So courage is not only limited to war. Okay. You may ask me, why did I draw such a big S? Because Socrates' learnings were about self. Most of the learnings that we take from Socrates is all about improving yourself continuously. We'll discover more. S for self. Okay? Self-discovery, self-improvement, continuous improvement until you reach a certain stage, and even then you keep walking towards gaining all of this. So now you can understand, you cannot be wise until you display courage. Courage, you cannot do justice without being courageous. So someone who's not courageous will not be able to do justice. Without justice and courage, you cannot have temperance. Without temperance, self-control and restraint, you can't be wise. So now you see, none of these virtues, as per Socrates, is separable from each other. As he famously said, okay, one, what he meant is anyone. Anyone cannot possess a virtue in its truest form until possesses all others. Okay, so you cannot possess a virtue in its truest or purest form until you possess other virtues. Now, why did I make a face smiling? Continuing the explanation further, Socrates said, these five virtues are not like features of your face. Eyes is different from nose, and nose is different from your mouth and from your ears. Virtues are not like distinct features of your face, but rather virtues are, imagine a block of gold. Now I break it up into, let's say, 5 pieces. Is each of the piece, is the essence of the piece, is the core, fundamental of the piece any different from the block of the gold? No, all those pieces are essentially the same. Okay, so now you learned a couple of dialogues. Virtues are not like distinct features of the face, but are like pieces of gold from a single block of gold. They are essentially all the same. That is why I said, one cannot possess a virtue in its truest, you can say noblest form until you possess the others. Okay, let's go ahead. Still, he rated wisdom as the core virtue. So as you get wiser, and we'll talk about what is wisdom. Okay, as you get wiser, you'll find it easier to be courageous, easier to have more temperance, all right, easier to do justice, easier to do other things. Okay, all right, so all right, I'll mention it. Wisdom, you can use a couple of words if you don't want. No, you have to use wisdom. Wisdom slash truth slash knowledge or intellect. Wisdom, truth, knowledge, intellect. I always encourage my students to use as many synonyms that appear in the ethics paper. Okay? And it's not optional because these are different terms which are used by Socrates himself to communicate his key learnings for you. All right? What is, for example, intellect? Intellect is a developed ability. Write it down. Intellect is a developed ability to advance sound logical reasoning. So as of now, this particular line should suffice for you. Okay? And developed ability to advance sound logical reasoning. All right. So that is wisdom. Let me rub this off. Okay. Now, piety is something I have not covered. I'll cover it at an appropriate time during the session. Okay. Piety comes from a word. The root is pious. Okay. So if you were to do a morphology, how this word is formed, we could break it up into two, pious and ity. Ity means ity is generally, it stands for the state of something, the condition of something. And pious is like holy, sacred, the condition of something being sacred, the condition of something being holy or piety. Okay, so there are very interesting dialogues around piety by Socrates. Okay, let's come back. Now imagine this S is doing it like this, pointing both hands and fingers towards himself. I told you Socrates is about self, majorly about self. Okay, so it's pointing out like this. I'll try and attempt to pointing to self. What is he pointing out? Self-knowledge. You remember what I had written here? Knowledge, truth. Then I had written wisdom and intellect. Okay? Self-knowledge, knowledge about yourself, your process of discovery of truth about self. Until you discover that, you cannot start, you cannot begin your pursuit of wisdom. Okay? So, when I say self-knowledge, let me put it down for you there. You need to examine what are your notions. Notions are concepts or ideas. What are your notions about yourself? Okay, because here we're talking of self-knowledge of yourself. How do you perceive situations? How do you perceive people, objects, the condition of something? Okay, for example, how do you perceive democracy? How do you perceive what is pious? Okay, do you believe more in rituals or cognition? Okay, that means do you actively think about things or you simply accept a tradition, a practice, an action a ritual, a custom. Okay, so notion is, as I said, ideas or concepts of various things. So we have concept in mind for everything in this world, right? So that is our concept of it. Is it true? Is it false? Okay, I'll give you an example for this. Notion. For example, somebody may have a notion, idea or concept in mind, which is like that democracy is about rule of majority. It's a concept in the mind or an idea about democracy, the way you feel about it. Democracy is rule of majority. If I look at Indian general elections 2024, if you analyze the voting share of various parties, you'll figure out that the ruling party got 36.5% of votes, and their partners, and with their partners they got about 42.5% vote share. Okay, I think it was about 42, let's put it 42.5% share. Now do you think this represents rule of majority? Because it seems 57.5% did not vote for them. Then how are you holding this notion in your mind that democracy is rule of majority? So when you deeply think, you re-examine your notion or an idea, you may figure out that democracy, now this is mine, okay? Democracy, as we have seen in India, is a rule of consolidated minority. Minority not as in a religious minority. Minority as in numbers. Because this seems to be the majority, this seems to be the minority. Okay? Not in religious terms or caste terms or anything like that. Just in pure number terms. Democracy seems to be the rule of a consolidated minority which voted together, choosing a bloc, choosing a party over a scattered majority. So if that was a notion or a concept in your idea, did it need re-examination? Yes. Okay? Alright. So Socrates, when he talks about self-knowledge, is about examining and evaluation of your notions, beliefs, your assumptions. Continued is biases, notions, beliefs, assumptions, biases of your prejudices. Remember, I have covered each one of them. In fact, session number 6 and 8, I have covered biases, assumptions, I have covered, biases, I have covered beliefs, assumptions, biases, prejudices. Session number 6 and session number 8. That is why I thought today we are at a stage where we can start learning from what Socrates said. Okay? Notions, beliefs, assumptions, biases, prejudices. Okay? He wanted you to look at various cultural impacts on you. Cultural impacts. The ideology you hold, ideology that you hold. This is something that we've not covered so far. Culture is something we have sufficiently covered. All right? He wants you to re-examine your entire process of socialization. We've covered this in session number 6 and 7. About 24 points of socialization from multiple dimensions, positive, negative, as a process, as a concept, with 2 examples. All right? Self-knowledge, that is what you need to have. All right? Reflect on it. So, self-knowledge, and just I'm going to put it as self-control. Your ability to control yourself, discipline yourself. So here I should have written temperance. Okay, but I'm just taking a liberty so that it kind of balances out. So self-control and restraint. Okay. When we talk about that era of in Greece, okay, Athens and all, Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, etc. When we talk of all of them, you'll find they use a word called soul. Okay, soul. So they use it too much. Just let's use this as a visual representation of soul. So what? One excellent concept which will repeatedly occur is care of your soul. Care of the soul. Care of the soul. We'll learn more about this. Okay. What he recommends is that your soul should be virtuous and just. Virtuous. Unity of virtues. All these virtues, and just. The term just, J-U-S-T, is an adjective, okay, of the term justice. Justice, just, okay. It's an adverb, okay. Taking care of the soul. I told you it is about self. Therefore, you have to take care of your soul, because if you lead a virtuous life and a just life, you will attain something he calls as inner harmony. There is a lot more to come. On each of these points, there will be a lot more that will come. Inner harmony. Okay. Now, I'd like to also use, this is like IH. Okay. IH. So one IH is about inner harmony. The second IH is about intellectual humility. Intellectual humility, that is, intellectually, you should be humble. You should not build walls around your thinking process. That is why he was saying you should have the wisdom and the courage. You should have the wisdom, you should have the courage to examine your beliefs, your notions, your assumptions, your biases, prejudices, the socialization, the cultural aspect, as well as the ideology that you hold very dear to you. Okay? So, all right, intellectual humility. If you think you already know things, you'll not be open to learning. You will begin your pursuit of excellence only when you become truly intellectually humble. So, humility comes from humble. If you already think you know everything and there is nothing more to know about a certain topic, and we just discovered that with a very simple example, democracy seems to be a rule of consolidated minority over a scattered majority. Okay, so it is not about majority, scattered. Okay. Intellectual humility. Because without this, you cannot begin on your journey. Let's call this journey as pursuit of wisdom, pursuit of knowledge, truth, intellect. So it's like a journey. Okay. Now, pursuit of wisdom is yet another thing that you have just learned. Okay. These all phrases come from Socrates. Okay. So that means if somebody is to start a journey towards wisdom, you need to achieve something called, you are actually starting from a state of ignorance. So let's imagine it as the ignorance station. These people who are ignorant, one of the best and surest ways of figuring out somebody's ignorance, as per Socrates, is they will speak with, they'll have their conviction, they'll speak about things with absolute certainty. Note it down. Absolute certainty. That means it's like they're 100% sure that their version of truth is the only version that exists, and it is 100% accurate, and that there is nothing to modify, change. They do not need to modify, change, introspect, reflect. That means think again on that. So their position will be that of absolute certainty. So maybe I could put it like this. Let's call it IG stands for ignorance. It starts with what did I just say is absolute. Certainty. Absolute certainty. So this is the station of absolute certainty. Here a person will display arrogance, humility. Opposite of humility is what? Arrogance, pride. So person will be full of arrogance, pride, closedness, to anything new, different, a different version, a new version, okay? A different dimension of the same thing. So maybe the origin of that thing is different or is different, won't accept it. Maybe the nature of that thing is different, won't accept. Maybe the scope of that thing is different, will not accept. Maybe the limitations of his or her knowledge is there, will not accept. Okay. Arrogance, pride, closeness. I suggest go back to session number 6 and 8 to know more about beliefs, assumptions, biases, prejudices. If a person is so arrogant, they'll never be able to check out, re-examine their biases. I told you biases are systemic errors in our thinking that lead to systematic deviations. I'd explained it much more simply in that session. Okay? So people start from here. The pursuit of wisdom actually begins only and only if you display intellectual humility. You're humble enough to learn. You do not have absolute certainty. You don't talk about things with absolute certainty and close your mind to things. Okay, intellectual humility. Also, very importantly, you should have intellectual curiosity. Intellectual curiosity to know more, which is opposite of being closed. All right? So, intellectual humility, intellectual curiosity. Only then you begin your pursuit of wisdom. Okay, so what he says is there is only one path that will lead you to all virtues. So, somewhere along the way, you might start picking up wisdom, knowledge, truth, intellect. Okay, start developing an advanced ability, or let us say you may develop an ability to advance sound logical reasoning. Okay, so let's say you start picking up bits and pieces of wisdom. You don't pick up wisdom entirely at once. It is a continuous process. You remember socialization? Continuous, lifelong, interactive process through which an individual internalizes his or her society's norms, values, beliefs, and representations. Session number 6 and 7. So I'm just going to borrow that part from definition of socialization. Wisdom, pursuit of wisdom is a continuous, lifelong, interactive process. Okay, let's leave it at that. And so, because these are inseparable, that means once I pick up a bit of wisdom, which is one of the most important components for Socrates, somewhere I'll start picking up courage, I'll start displaying temperance, somewhere I'll start displaying piety, being pious. Okay, respect for pious, holiness, sacredness, respect for that, and truly be able to respect all of that only as I continue on my journey. Okay? So please remember one thing, this journey is not stopping, because this journey is leading towards excellence. Socrates does not define destination where you stop one fine day and say, now I am wise, now I am courageous, now I am just. That means I do justice to myself and to others. Now I display piety in its purest, noblest form. ऐसा कुछ नहीं है. All right? So it is a journey to excellence, and the journey continues. It's a continuous, lifelong, interactive process. You keep learning. So all the time, as you keep getting wiser, you still display intellectual curiosity and intellectual humility. The day you stop doing this, your journey ends right then and there. So we will add one more thing here, taking it from here. Self-knowledge. Okay. So when I come to ES, self-examination, self-reflection, I'll keep adding some terms to these diagrams. Okay. This is, you all noted down? Fair enough. So now you know what is pursuit of wisdom as per Socrates. Coming back, what is opposite of harmony? So you're going to be walking towards, and your life is going to be a harmonious life. Which is virtuous and just. Where are we speaking about this? Care of the soul. That means you're really taking care of your soul. You're doing justice to yourself. Self. Unless you do justice to yourself, you can't do justice to others. We'll learn more about this. Okay. Harmonious life. Fulfilled life. So couple of other terms I'll mention to you in a while as we go ahead. Okay. Harmonious life. How about this person? Will display disharmony. Take your cue from here. Likely to harm yourself. This person is like to have to be unjust, and unjust, opposite of just, unjust, opposite of virtue is likely to be vicious or vice. Vices. Like there are virtues, there are vices. Okay? Opposite of this, unjust. Opposite of courage, cowardice. Temperance, somebody indulgent. Excessive indulgence. Somebody who cannot keep restraint. No or low self-discipline. Okay? Slave to one's passions. Okay. Why did I mention this? Because you may want to also add, here is, if you don't have temperance, you're likely to be slave of your passions. Because Socrates believed that without temperance, we'll all become slaves to our passions. Our senses, our five senses, will provoke us, will lead us to sensory pleasures. And those sensory pleasures are insatiable. What does it mean? That can never get satisfied. Okay? Your sensory pleasures of eyes, ears, sounds, the taste, etc., touch, etc., they are insatiable. They'll never get satisfied. Okay? Slave of your passions. So this self-control, if you don't have it, then otherwise you become slave of your passions. Okay, so good so far. Now, what I've done is, I've covered this. I'll try and cover this. O, S-O. I'll keep rubbing it so that I have more space. All right. So when you say S-O, you can imagine it like a queue. It's just visual cues. Imagine it like a queue. Q is for questioning. So, Socratic method. You must know this term. Socratic method. Socratic method is called elenchus. Okay? Or you can also call it Socratic questioning or Socratic questioning method. That is called elenchus. What is elenchus? When you cross-examine yourself as well as others. Yourself separately, others separately. Okay? But when we use elenchus, it is more about cross-examining others. So if somebody came to you with a belief that you talk to that person about democracy and says, nobody should ideally protest against the government because in a democracy it is rule of majority. Go back to your example. You can start cross-examination of that person, like asking, okay, what was the voting percentage of the ruling party? What was the voting percentage of their alliance partners? Slowly leading him or her towards realizing that the people who did not vote for the ruling alliance are actually the majority. It is just that they voted for a lot of different parties which were not in alliance, and therefore it became scattered majority. Okay? That kind of cross questioning, a method of cross questioning, you can also say broadly interrogation, like you have interrogation. Don't use the word interrogation. This is just for you to kind of understand it a little bit more. Okay? I'll speak more about elenchus. So Socratic questioning. The real good thing here to notice, Socrates never used the lecture method to teach anybody anything. He did not run an academy, unlike his disciples, Plato, Aristotle, and lot of people of that era who were popularly called as sophists. S-O-P-H-I-S-T-S. Don't bother about the word sophist. right now. We'll come to it. In those days, like you learn from gurus, coaches, business coaches, life coaches, lifestyle coaches. Similarly, there used to be gurus at that point of time, coaches who used to coach young people, preparing them in the art of debate. Okay, debate, preparing them in the art of developing certain notions and everything so that they could become part of the city's governing council and hold important administrative positions which were very lucrative. So there was a complete coaching industry even at that time, and they were coaching in the art of intellect, the art of debating. Okay, so they had certain agendas to fulfill. So when their students became successful and occupied high offices in the city-state of Athens, obviously a lot of students will rush to them and give them more goods, materials, money, etc., gold, etc. Okay, so that they could live life of luxury. So that is where Socrates used to use elenchus or cross-examination even on those gurus or those coaches to cross-examine what they thought is the truth, what they were teaching. And his method of cross-examination was so efficient and effective that most of them ultimately ended up thoroughly embarrassed because they did not have the right answers to his questions. Okay, we'll talk a lot more about elenchus because it is a very important concept to us. Okay, through elenchus, this is also called a method of refutation. That means three things. Elenchus means three things. Test logical consistency of somebody's notions, beliefs, assumptions, biases, prejudices, cultural learnings, ideology, somebody's socialization, and one more element I'll add here is somebody's experiences. Because a lot of people claim they know things because they had an experience. I told you in my previous lecture number 6, experience by itself is not important. What actually is important is the way you interpret your experience. Experience, refutation, so is one part. So what he told about elenchus is you have to test logical consistency of someone's arguments when they are speaking about all of this, and typically they'll speak to you with absolute certainty. So if Socrates would ask what is justice, they'll reply with absolute certainty, which he says is which actually signifies or reflects your ignorance. It reflects your arrogance, reflects you're closed to new and different things, new learnings. different learnings. You take a lot of pride, but not in a positive sense. Okay? Method of refutation, we'll speak more about it. So it is testing logical consistency of somebody's arguments. Second is you expose logical inconsistencies of that argument. Okay? And the third is you end up refuting. अब आपने गलत प्रूफ कर दिया. You end up refuting whatever is the initial claim made by that person. Okay? And you refute it as the initial claim as false or inadequate or unfounded. वो ऐसी बात कर रहे हैं that has no ground. Their argument has no ground. So it's not even real. It's imagined. Okay. If you do this process correctly, it will lead a person with absolute certainty to a state of aporia. Aporia is puzzled because that person came to you with absolute certainty. The person approached you and had a feeling that he or she knew everything what was to know about that. And after your cross-examination, which is very effective, that person is now puzzled. Like I gave you that democracy example, majority, minority. You end up puzzled. You should also use this word called perplexed. Perplexed. So instead of writing puzzled, use perplexed. A state of being, aporia is a state of being perplexed, where a person now is not absolutely sure as when he or she came in. Now the arrogance has disappeared. Okay, the person is perplexed, confused, unsure of it. Okay, now we can go to the other parts. So, all right, how many of you know that Socrates was actually made to drink poison? A poison called hemlock, Hemlock. So under this, I'm just going to draw like a glass of wine, but he was not offered wine. He was offered a poison called hemlock. He was given a chance. And why did it happen? Okay. The first thing he was actually accused was impiety. It is important for you to know this. Historical perspective with learnings. One, he was accused of impiety. I'll tell you what it means. And corrupting the youth of Athens. I'll take this off quickly, okay? Impiety. If you do morphology of how this word is formed, then instead of IM, it will become IN. And piety, pious, and ITY, which is the state or condition of something. In as in inconsistency. In would mean essentially not. Okay? Or opposed to. So condition of being opposed to being pious. The condition or state of being opposed to something that is considered sacred or holy is impiety. Okay? So he was accused of this. We will deal about this when maybe in the second session about Socrates, I'll talk about impiety under a dialogue which is called Euthypro. 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 There is a dialogue. It's an important dialogue for us to learn about Elenchus. Okay. So, important thing is he was given an option of compromise. He was given an option of compromising, withdrawing the dialogues that he taught the youth of Athens, admit that he was wrong, stop his philosophizing. He did not. That could have spared his life. But he decided to accept consequences because he believed that accepting compromise versus accepting consequences. Now, this what we are writing, we will talk about it. We'll develop this even more when we start talking of Socratic intellectualism. Socratic concept of justice. All of this will come into play. Now, a general comment that I want to make here, is, if people were ready to accept consequences, there would be hardly any unethical behavior, action, deeds, intentions. Okay, if they could accept responsibility and accept consequences, then almost 80 to 90% of our problem in ethics would get solved. Okay, then there'll be no more moral dilemmas to handle. It is because people do not want to accept responsibility and consequences. Somewhere they do a compromise. At this stage, you might feel that we do compromise with others. Socrates is about self. This is when he says compromise, most of the time he means the compromise that you do within yourself. Okay? The compromise within yourself. In this situation, yes, he could have compromised with the authorities of the city-state of Athens, but he did not. Rather, he accepted responsibility and consequences. So he was given 2-3 opportunities. He accepted consequences because he wanted to communicate couple of things. Instead of compromise, he wanted to communicate importance of courage, which is one of the virtues. Without courage, you will not accept responsibility and consequences. No coward ever accepts, or no unjust person will ever accept responsibility and consequences. Socrates did that because he said that he has to demonstrate that what he's talking, what he's preaching, not preaching, he never preached, but all that he stood for everybody that he engaged, the youth of Athens, when he challenged the coaches that I mentioned, the sophists, and made them realize that they did not know what they were speaking of, or what they believed, what they were preaching was wrong, unfounded, or inadequate. All right? So, he wanted to display courage, commitment. You cannot display commitment without courage. Okay? Courage, commitment. You can also write the word conviction. You cannot display conviction in whatever you stand for until you have the courage. Okay? Courage, commitment also comes from courage. Conviction also comes from courage. Now you see, the true meaning of courage has started emerging. Okay? Because he believed that if he compromised, that would be him being unjust to other people. If he compromised, he would have been unjust. He did not want to be unjust towards other people. He wanted to be doing the just, standing up for justice. Just. Okay? Now that we have spoken about this, we can go a little further than this. Okay? All right. So we discussed these things. I'm just going to rub this off. First this one, and now this one. Okay. Now we will deal with this CRT. I'll rub this one also off. In the example I gave you about writing answers, now do you feel that instead of writing I would interrogate that person, okay? I would cross-examine that person. What if you now write in your answer, I would use Socratic questioning bracket elenchus, or you could write I would use elenchus bracket Socratic questioning / refutation to make the other person realize blah blah blah, that his or her notions, beliefs, assumptions, etc. may be misplaced. Okay? So that will immediately take your answer to a higher level. Now we'll deal about CRAT. I'm introducing two T's here. The first T will stand for truth. So whenever I say truth, it's wisdom, truth, knowledge, or intellect. Okay? Now look at this. Critical thinking is very important. So when we keep speaking of wisdom, knowledge, truth. What are the tools we deploy? Critical thinking. Or you can also call it critical analysis. This R stands for reasoning. Reasoning. So when you talk about what would be the tools for developing wisdom, it is critical thinking, critical analysis, reasoning. What are you aiming for? Truth, wisdom, knowledge, intellect. Okay. We begin this, look at it here, ignorance. So we go from ignorance to intellectual curiosity plus intellectual humility plus self knowledge to reach to wisdom, truth, knowledge, intellect. Basically, this journey I have put it in these words. Starting from ignorance, we use intellectual curiosity. You should be genuinely curious about it. Okay? For example, Israel versus Palestine. I assure you, okay, since we do not have that kind of time here, but I assure you, most of the beliefs of people regarding the Israel versus Palestine struggle are incorrect. Okay? Because they've not deeply examined the entire thing. They're driven by a lot of biases, prejudices, ideology, some cultural conventions, so they cannot see it clearly. Okay. Now, when you speak about this, all of this should lead to something we call as Socratic intellectualism. Socratic intellectualism. Okay? That is yet another word for wisdom, etc. But this will actually tell you what Socratic justice is all about. So I suggest intellectualism. So what I suggest is whenever you speak Socratic intellectualism, always combine it with two V's. It'll help you kind of instantly recall. So whenever you say intellectualism, say Socratic intellectualism, VV. V stands for virtues and the opposite of virtues, that is vices. Virtues and vices, good qualities and bad qualities, good character, bad character in that sense. Qualities that make a good character, qualities that would lead to a bad character. Okay, although please don't take it literally. This is just for you to get it in your mind. Okay. Socrates, by the way, did not believe that it was bad character or something like that. That some people had bad characters. Okay, he believed that it was all about ignorance. So there was nothing that he believed was a bad character, but it was ignorance led people to vicious behavior, unjust behavior, to cowardly behavior, to not having temperance, not being wise, and actually not giving respect to the gods for the proper reason. Okay, so anyway, that discussion about gods, we keep it for the second session of Socrates. Intellectual, Socratic intellectualism, VV. What I want to tell you now is, we take it further and say Socratic intellectualism should lead all of this pursuit of wisdom, everything, truth. This should lead to moral excellence. This journey will lead you to moral excellence. Okay? Moral excellence will lead you to something called EUDAI. Okay, let me quickly note down something. I'll explain what daimon and daimonian means in the context of Socrates. So, pursuit of all of this will lead to moral excellence, because he's constantly talking about virtues and vices. We started our discussion with virtues, 5 virtues, unity of virtues, interconnectedness of virtues, inseparableness of virtues. Okay? Moral excellence means where you display virtues. And he said these are inseparable from each other. Pursuit of wisdom leads to pursuit of moral excellence. He never speaks about destination. It is pursuit of moral excellence. Okay? So you could use a word, a Greek word, which is called moral excellence. You could use a Greek word called ARETE, arete, which means moral excellence. Alright? So arete is essentially about virtues and excellence, or excellence of virtues. Okay? Arete is moral excellence, virtues as well as excellence. Fair. Now, what is this word eudaimonia? What is this word eudaimonia? Maybe I can write it a little higher. Pursuit of wisdom, just one second. So this arrow now comes here. Moral excellence, eudaimonia, please note down, it means achieving highest human potential. That is one. Second is, these are very famous terms. Eudaimonia. If you mention this in your answer, if it is relevant, it is needed, you say leading to a life of eudaimonia, or you say pursuit of life of excellence leading to highest human potential. Okay, fulfilling a highest human potential, towards a life leading to highest human potential. So what are the words that you could use here? Highest. Please nobody write HHP. It has no meaning. This is because I want to save time, effort and space. Slash, you will come across this word called human flourishing. How can a human being flourish? Truly flourish. Achieve his or her highest human potential is leading a life of moral excellence, a virtuous and a just life. Justice to yourself, leading to justice towards others, and overall a virtuous life. And it's a continuous, lifelong, interactive process with no destination where you end it, but it's a continuous process, highest human potential or human flourishing. So you flourish in every possible dimension as an individual, as a human being. So this is what he meant by moral excellence, arate, okay, virtues and excellence. Okay, now I had missed out on daimon and daimonian. Okay, I got reminded from here. All right, daimon. So when it was said that when the city governing body, the city governing council accused him of impiety, the state or the condition of not being reverent to city gods. In those days, used to have city gods. All right, something like 12 of them, each one of them standing for different things. Okay, both male and female. Okay, you might have heard of couple of them like Zeus, etc. Okay. Socrates made a claim that he listens to his inner voice. He said that since his childhood, he has been accompanied by an inner voice. That inner voice, that inner spirit, which gave this inner voice, the inner spirit is daimon. It's the inner spirit. And the inner voice is called daimonian. Daimonian. Daimonion. So this is the inner spirit. It was something like saying, like nowadays we say, my conscience doesn't allow me. In those days, it was not popularly known as conscience. So Socrates did not make use of that term conscience. And actually conscience is different from daimonian. Okay? Daimon, because he claimed inner spirit, his inner spirit guided him whenever he was about to commit something wrong. He claimed that since childhood, this inner spirit called daimon, through daimonian, which is inner voice, would guide him when he was about to commit something wrong or do something wrong. So when he was offered poison, he said, my daimonian, my inner voice is not asking me to compromise and save myself from certain death. Therefore, he said, death cannot be, by embracing death, I am not doing anything wrong. Because if it was wrong, daimonian, my inner voice, would have warned me that I was about to do something wrong. He claimed that his inner voice, daimonian, never told him to do. Whenever he was about to do some good things or he did good things, that was the time when daimonian was silent. But whenever he was about to do something wrong, his inner voice told him not to do that thing because it was wrong. And he said, therefore, I am not afraid of death because my inner voice is telling me that death is not an evil thing. That is why my inner voice is silent. It's not telling me that it is evil. If it was evil, my inner voice would have said it is wrong. Okay, daimonian. Okay, so now you've understood this? Fair. Now, we will come back to this, which is about a whole lot of justice. The 5 sentences that will follow this will give you enough inventory, enough intellectual weapons for you to be able to put these 5 sentences in multiple contexts all through your paper of ethics, philosophical essays, interviews, development of your own character, okay, and a way of thinking. All right. So we'll be talking about justice. Before I come to these 5 sentences, I would like to deal with the last 2. Because I'm using this as mnemonics, tips or tricks, therefore, I like to look at it like this. Self-examination. Examination of yourself, which is also like standing in front of a mirror and looking at yourself. Okay? Examining yourself in a mirror. Do not write this, examining yourself in a mirror. This is me just telling you that self-examination is like reflecting on what you believe. Notions, beliefs, assumptions, biases, prejudices, cultural practices, traditions, cultural norms, customs, rituals, the ideology, and whatever you learnt out of the process of socialization. Okay, so you can use, I have already given you in, as I mentioned, sessions 6 and 7. This you can use it like a memory gadget. Okay, notions, beliefs, assumptions, biases, prejudices, then uh, culture, cultural norms, values, beliefs, representations, socialization, ideology, experiences. This is like a memory gadget. So whenever you think here, you can always apply the same learnings. Okay? Start using all of this. Now I'm going to rub off this because I need a lot of space. I hope you noted down harmonious life, disharmony, from harm, harmful, unjust, vicious, vices. Okay. Now, Socratic intellectualism will give you, even before coming to that, why don't I discuss with you one more concept, then we come here. Let me help you visualize something. When I rubbed off this pursuit of wisdom, so somebody who pursues that path of wisdom, knowledge, truth, intellect, is his or her life is going to be like this. This is not what Socrates said. This is my own imagination to help you remember. Can you imagine a very well flourishing tree? A beautiful flourishing tree, best of health, okay, and very healthy roots, very deep and healthy roots. So the tree has very healthy roots. Now, what is important is, you remember this CRAT, truth? That means Socrates said that if you want to achieve eudaimonia, could you please complete this? Eudaimonia. That means highest human potential. If you want to achieve human flourishing, if you want to achieve happiness, if you want a just, virtuous soul, which is also a unified soul. Okay? When you want to achieve moral excellence or arate, as I told you, virtues and excellence, arate. Okay? Moral excellence, happiness. When you want to achieve harmony, soul, okay? Or you can write harmonious life. Care of the soul. Everything will come together. Okay. When you want to achieve this, these are like the fruits of a flourishing tree. The diagram is mine. The arguments are of Socrates. All right. Then he says the roots of all of this is critical, like I use that trick above. The roots of that is actually wisdom. And as I told you, wisdom, truth, knowledge, intellect, attained through intellectual curiosity, intellectual humility, self examination or self reflection, then critical thinking, critical analysis, reasoning. So he says Wisdom, truth, knowledge and intellect can be attained through this. Somebody who attains wisdom, so the roots of Udaimonia, which is these two terms, highest human potential, human flourishing, care of the soul, harmonious life, moral excellence, happiness, everything, all of this can be attained, the roots of which is wisdom. And the tools are here. Okay, so he calls it, you can call it the virtuous life. Virtuous life, just life. The roots are this. Now he compares it with a life of vices. Life of vices. How it will appear. So I'll try and draw something. Okay. Compare it with this. A flourishing, beautiful flourishing tree full of fruits and everything. A life of vices. Okay? Where you are being vicious to yourself. Vicious to yourself and therefore vicious to others. Okay? Okay. The roots of which, obviously the roots will also not be healthy. It seems like even the roots have decayed. Okay? Now let's put everything on the opposite side. Moral excellence, let's put it moral weakness. Moral excellence, moral weakness. Disharmonious life. So you can keep noting down. Disharmonious life. We said unified soul. Please write fragmented. Fragmented. Scattered. Unjust, vicious soul. Unjust, vicious soul. Unjust, vicious soul. Unjust, vicious life. Okay. Will such a person achieve Udaimonia, which is highest human potential, achievement of highest human potential or human flourishing? Answer is no. Will it be full of happiness? No. Will this be taking care of your soul? Is this an example of taking care of your soul? The answer is no. So he says, very important. So unjust, vicious, let's say, character, actions, why he calls this as vicious slash unjust. Vicious or unjust, because such a person is vicious towards himself or herself also. You know why? because such a person is not displaying any of this. The person is unjust, displays cowardice, not courage, cowardice, makes compromises not only with others but herself or himself, makes compromises. So that means you can actually understand this as a situation of this person is likely to make compromises. So you can write compromises, write corruptions slash tormenting of soul, tormenting of corruption of compromised soul, corrupted soul or corruption of soul, and tormenting of soul. So here we had said care of the soul. This is tormented soul. So I would write compromised, corrupted, tormented soul. That is the end result. Here roots were wisdom. Here it is ignorance. Very important for you to note down is, so the roots of this is ignorance. Okay? Compromises, same thing. Compromises, corruption, tormented soul. It leads to compromises. So what happens is, all these compromises, what does it lead to? It leads to a surrender. I suggest write two things. Surrender of self before passions. So you have surrendered yourself to your passions. That will be right language wise. Surrender of self to your passions. What are passions? Anything that you desire. You remember I had already spoken about what is desires, what are preferences, emotions, feelings. Okay, when we were talking of subjectivity, so we talked about emotions, feelings, desires, preferences, emotional attitudes or sentiments. Well, you could desire anything, howsoever irrational, illogical, illusionary it could be. So you have an illusion or you have a delusion. You desire something unreal, irrational, illogical, unscientific, proven to be unscientific. And your motive behind it or drive, what is driving you to desire it is greed. I had spoken about these couple of factors: greed, selfishness, vengeance. Vengeance is badla. Okay. We had sufficiently covered this. And I told you in philosophy and in ethics, whenever we talk of desires, it's never in a positive context. Most of the time, it will have a negative meaning attached to it. It will signify you desiring something or preferring something over something out of greed, selfishness, vengeance, anger, hatred. Okay? Surrender of self. Let me also tell you, I'll tell you what this would mean. I'll come to this. Surrender of self to your passions. Remember, I had written here something. You become a slave of your passions. You become a slave to your passions or slave of your passions. It is something like, it is something like having unlimited amount, your passions wine. Food. I told you, your sensory pleasures, they are insatiable. They cannot be satisfied. Simple food, drinks, wealth, your pride, arrogance, it knows no bounds, no boundaries. It doesn't have a boundary. It cannot be satiated. The lust, yes, the lust for power, the lust for making a name for yourself, being famous, the lust for sex, food, drinks, material possessions, like what we will study under consumerism. Okay, when we talk about corporate governance and we talk about many other things under it, one of the things will be consumerism. It is insatiable. It is vicious behavior towards yourself. You have no temperance. You have no courage to control your temperance. You have no courage, therefore you lack temperance. You don't have wisdom, therefore you lack temperance. You are being unjust with yourself because you're not being wise. You have no temperance. You have no courage. It's a cowardly behavior, cowardice. Okay, surrender of self or slavery. Becoming a slave to your passions. Vicious, for example, violence, vengeance, hatred, anger, discrimination, the list can continue. Vicious. You are being vicious to yourself by surrender of self to your passions, by becoming a slave to your passions. It's vicious behavior. And somebody who is vicious towards self will also display being vicious to others. An unjust person will demonstrate injustice to others, to self and others, through being violent, displaying vengeance or vengeful behavior, hatred, anger, disgust. So I suggest, let us wrap this session till here. It's been a whole lot of learning. I want you to go back and re-examine the whole concept of Socrates. Whatever we've learned so far, run those dialogues in your mind. Okay? Including all those memory hacks, tips, tricks, those sentences. Most importantly, try and understand everything that has been communicated till here deeply. I am sure if you do that, you'll have a lot of questions for me when we do our next session. Okay? This should be sufficient for you at this point of time. Alright? So till next time, best of luck as always.